Alright, here we are with the medium questions. This is part 2 of reading from opensource.com about SysAdmin job interview questions. So let's just keep it rolling here. What is RAID? What is RAID 0, RAID 1, 5, 6, and 10? That is kind of tough. I always have a hard time remembering what each number specifically means. So I'm going to try to give you some creative ways here to remember these. First, know that RAID stands for a redundant array of inexpensive disks. The goal of using this is to increase the performance and reliability of data storage. So my first question is, what are 2 key reasons to use a RAID? And the answer is to increase performance and reliability, like in backups and the ability to depend on that data still existing no matter what happens. So let's start with RAID 0 here. This is also known as disk striping, which is a technique that breaks up a file and spreads the data across all of the disk drives in a RAID group. There are no safeguards against failure. Alright, so this is kind of a silly question, but here we go. What does the 0 in RAID 0 stand for? It stands for zero safeguards against failure. This must strictly be a performance thing. Alright, next, RAID 1, a popular disk subsystem that increases safety by writing the same data on 2 drives, called mirroring. RAID 1 does not increase write performance, so no increase in performance. But read performance may increase up to the sum of each disk's performance. Also, if one drive fails, the second drive is used, and the failed drive is manually replaced. After replacement, the RAID controller duplicates the contents of the working drive into one. Alright, so this one's all about failure, and a good way to remember it to me is to answer the question, well, how many people are you looking at when you look in a mirror? And I'm just thinking about, a small mirror. The answer is 1. RAID 1 is all about mirroring. I know, silly, but this is how my mind works, and if it helps you get a sysadmin job, then I've done a good job. Now we jump all the way up to 5. Apparently there is no 2, 3, or 4. RAID 5 is a disk subsystem that increases safety by computing parity data and increasing speed. RAID 5 does this by interleaving data across 3 or more drives. So going back to the idea of striping from RAID 0. Now upon failure of a single drive, subsequent reads can be calculated from the distributed parity such that no data is lost. Alright, so one way to remember this might be like, what is 0 plus 1? Because if you take the concept of RAID 0 and add that to the concept of RAID 1, we get RAID 5. Okay, let's delete that. Might not be the best way to remember this. How about this one? What is RAID 5 ensuring? And it's ensuring an increase in performance and reliability. So it's kind of like the best of both worlds. Clearly, though, it's going to take a bit. And I wonder what reasons could exist for people just not always going with a RAID 5. Alright, here's RAID 6. This extends RAID 5 by adding another parity block, and this level requires a minimum of 4 disks and can continue to execute read-write with any 2 concurrent disk failures. RAID 6 does not have a performance penalty for reading operations, but it does have a performance penalty on write operations, and because of the overhead associated with parity calculations. So I'm asking, what will RAID 6 decrease? And this is specifically write performance. And here's our last one, RAID 10. So we jump past 7, 8, and 9, just like we jump past 2, 3, and 4. RAID 10 is also known as RAID 1 plus 0, and RAID 10, or 1.0, combines disk mirroring and disk striping to protect data. Now this one requires a minimum of 4 disks and stripes data across mirrored pairs. As long as 1 disk in each mirrored pair is functional, data can be retrieved. And if 2 disks in the same mirrored pair fail, all data will be lost because there is no parity in the striped sets. So how about this question? How many disks do you need in a RAID 10? And even better, what's the difference between RAID 10 and RAID 5? That sure puts my earlier joke about 1 plus 0 equal 5 as a particularly horrible joke, because I guess RAID 5 is not truly combining the concept of RAID 0 and RAID 1. But maybe in the interview, if you get this much out about RAID, they'll be happy. Anything else can be researched and then you follow through with whatever the manager wants you to use. Alright, so that was a big section. Let's now move into Which port is used for the ping command? That's like an arbitrary, random, specific question. Well, the ping command uses ICMP. Specifically, it uses ICMP echo requests and ICMP echo reply packets. ICMP does not use either UDP or TCP communication services, and instead it uses raw IP communication services. This means that the ICMP message is carried directly in an IP datagram data field. Long-winded way of saying it doesn't use any ports at all. But now I'm curious, can a computer know when it's being pinged? And I get a squiggle line, but I think this question makes sense. Can a computer know or become aware of when it's pinged? When you're looking up the answer to that, you might want to research the ping of death. And I wonder if that's ever okay in an interview, if you turn the question they asked you into a question you're asking them, because now they have sparked some curiosity in you. Maybe personally, I would want to work for a company that likes that in an interview. But of course, I wouldn't be too aggressive in flipping those questions back on to the interviewers. Okay, let's focus. This will be our last question, so I will have another part to the middle or medium questions, that is. So here's our last one. What is the difference between a router and a gateway? What is the default gateway? Okay, so router describes the general technical function, is layer 3 forwarding, or a hardware device intended for that purpose, while a gateway describes the function for the local segment, providing connectivity elsewhere. You could also state that you set up a router as a gateway. Another term is hop, which describes forwarding between subnets. Now, the term default gateway is used to mean the router on your LAN, which has the responsibility of being the first point of contact for traffic to computers outside the LAN. Okay, I think they explain that in a not the best way. Here's how I would answer the question. A router is routing packets of data using its IP address, and organizations can have many routers. There are also larger routers out there. But if we're specifically talking about inside the organization, sure, there could be a few routers and they would connect the different networks so you can have a few LANs within your organization. But you should remember that a router is connecting networks while switches connect computers. Now, if a router is performing the job of a switch, no problem. The term gateway usually comes into play when we're talking about a router that's connecting to the internet outside. So whichever router is connected to that, then the organization could call that its gateway. So with that, our last question is just the question we read here, and you can choose to use this person's answer or my answer. Really though, we might just be arguing semantics. The key is we're looking at layer 3, that is the IP address. So that's it for this video, and next time we'll go ahead and start with the explaining of the boot process for Linux.